Hello, welcome to my end of Sprint 2 video. I'm going to demonstrate our application. Next, I'm going to go into GitHub and talk about some of the code and commits that I made. Then finally, I'm going to go into Team Gantt and talk about some of my tasks and hours that I put into the project. Just to clarify, this version of our application is a few commits old, just because I think this version highlights some of my specific changes to the application. And our demonstration tomorrow, it'll be slightly different, just because it'll be a few commits ahead. Let's go ahead and I'll sign in. There we go. So we have the profile screen right here. We also have a tab for messages, history, and the calendar. My first feature that I added here is the tab navigator at the bottom. That took some research and some time to implement. And my second feature is actually this add meal pod button for the calendar. I wanted to get to know Firebase a little more, so I went ahead and implemented this button. If I go ahead and press it, it says hard-coded meal pod added. I'll click OK, and you can already see that Firebase has added it to the meal pods collection. And yes, it is hard-coded, so this is a test meal pod. These are the two main features that I added to the application over these two sprint periods. In GitHub, I have 6 commits. 2 of them are actually duplicates from from 2 of these branches here. But the bulk of the code that I wrote is actually in these 2 commits. You can see that the commits have been all entered before January 31st, which is the deadline for the second sprint. So that's all on time. I'll go ahead and talk about this first. So adding a basic implementation of tab navigation. So before we had those 4 screens and tab navigation, we just had a dashboard screen. It was the only screen that existed after logging in. But the dashboard wasn't going to represent what all those 4 screens are. They're all 4 separate screens. So the profile, messages, history, and calendar. I wanted to not use the word dashboard to represent a screen name, but rather to represent the tab navigator containing all 4 of these screens. So that's where I changed the name. I actually changed the name from dashboard.js to profile.js because it initially had the logout screen, and I figured that, well, users are probably going to look in the profile screen to log out. So I went ahead and renamed dashboard to profile. I learned that this is something known as nested navigation. I didn't have to change much in terms of the stack navigator, because the stack navigator just saw the dashboard as one screen. So 4 screens that are tab navigated together. Since the tab navigator had its own, it was in a different library than npm install, I guess. So I went ahead and referenced in the instructions to run one more command before running the project. And this right here is just Git wondering how renaming a file works, and it just thinks I deleted it and created a new one. But anyways, enough about that one. So writing a test function for adding meal pods to Firebase. So here I styled calendar.js. I modeled that after the profile screen, and instead of the button being programmed to log out, I programmed it to add a meal pod. And this function actually comes from the calendar methods file. And calendar methods, these are some of our backend. This is what I want to be the backend methods for the calendar. I modeled this after Max's Firebase methods file. he has some back end programming that references users and adds users. Well, this time I wanted to reference meal pods and add a meal pod. So in here I reference the meal pods collection in Firebase, and I add a new one with this hard-coded name, this hard-coded description. I set the user to be, for some reason it's not in this commit, I guess I decided after the fact. I wanted to add an admins array where the current user would automatically be an admin, and an empty members array for when we wanted to add members later. So with the new calendar, screen added, I had to go ahead and reference that. Originally, we had an example calendar screen, which was just text that said calendar exclamation point. So I went ahead and commented that out and referenced the new calendar right here. And that's about it with the GitHub code. So on Team Gantt, I'm going to talk about some of my tasks and the hours that I submitted for this. First of all, setting up the GitHub repository took me about the rest of class time to do when we first started. And most of that sprint was kind of about coordinating, figuring out GitHub between my team members, and reminding me of all of the things that I can do, and teaching some of my teammates about that. It was important enough that I thought it would be worth timing in class. An hour I spent testing the project without adding my own changes to it, just like a clone, and see if it works out of the box, which we eventually got to. Oh, and by the way, I don't have like an overall view. I apologize for that. So let me just convince you with the hours. So 1 hour and 46 minutes plus 3 hours and 29 minutes. That gets us to 5 hours and 15 minutes. And then in the second half here of the second sprint is where I start really adding some of my own changes to the code. So I researched tab navigation. It took a bulk of my morning to implement that. And then on Friday, that was when I started dealing with with Firebase, and figuring out some of its quirks, like having an issue with reading user data. So 7 hours and 12 minutes plus the 5 hours and 15 minutes that I had there gets me to 12 hours and 27 minutes worked on this project. And yeah, that's basically the current status of our project right now. So thank you for watching. I look forward to continuing this project over the semester. So I talked about, I demonstrated the application, I went onto GitHub and talked about some of the code, and I went to Team Gantt to talk about some of my hours and tasks for it. All right, thank you.